Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. This is The Amateur, where we're here just to talk life, hobbies, politics, ideologies, what have you. And on today's episode, we're going to be talking about the Uvalde incident in Texas on May 24th, 2022. I'm going to try to make it through this video without crying because it still hits me very hard. It still weighs heavy on my heart. But I do want to, I just wanted to, the reason this video or my perspective or my take on this is coming out so late is one, I just wanted to just give some space between the actual event and any sort of take on it. One, two, to have a little bit more information come out. And just because it's just a very sensitive topic, and for me, like, anything sooner would have just been too soon. And there's never going to be enough time. There's never going to be enough time that will have passed to placate the loss of these children, of the families and of those communities there. But I just did not want to hop on the hype around there. And so for this and my take on it, I just want to start with the shooter. And I'm only going to call him the shooter because he doesn't deserve to have his name remembered. He doesn't deserve to have his face shown. He doesn't deserve that sort of acknowledgement, because that was something that he wanted in his text, to be famous for what he does, and for something as evil and as vile as that, they shouldn't have happened. And that's just another gripe to concern. I don't think that media should be hyping up evildoers. They shouldn't become famous or become recognized or infamous from their action. They need to just be forgotten and erased from memory. Does that sound hard? It might be, but I don't particularly care. This is the stories and the things that I've read about him. And so pretty much what happened, though, of the story, as we all understand, is that we had a young man, a little boy. He first shot his grandmother, his 66-year-old grandmother, and then drove a truck, crashed it, and then went into Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas, and started shooting classrooms. It ended up killing 21 personnel, 19 kids, 2 teachers. And it took 77 minutes from the time he entered school for the policemen to stop the threat, to end his life, and to stop the shooting from going on. And the story of Uvalde is a story of failure in all parts of the system. All parts of the system failed these kids, and the police officers failed in their duty. I don't understand how people have not been fired. They should have been fired, and potentially even just tried for negligence, because we know that this, everything that went down during this incident was poorly done. And so, just starting off, I'm gonna blame the FBI here because they probably deserve the blame. I don't know, just the level of incompetence and everything that went on here. Y'all can't tell me that Uvalde wasn't an inside job. It was you're gonna have to do some hard convincing for me to believe that it wasn't an inside job by House. Again, just how incompetent these actions were. But it started off, the shooter had signs, for sure. He had signs and symptoms of someone who was deranged or mad in his history. He had a social media chat group, and the FBI does monitor these things. So y'all think y'all have privacy, maybe not, but the FBI does have some control in monitoring some of these things. And I'm not convinced that they did not have any sort of knowledge or understanding or inkling of information that this kid was in a group chat about school shooters on Instagram or something like that. It seems a little suspicious to me, and whether or not this kid was or wasn't encouraged. There were just plenty of signs. And not to get too far into his history, which you can look up, But essentially, this wasn't the first time that he'd shown or displayed these acts of violence or threats of violence. He had a history of putting cats into plastic bags and throwing them at people's houses. People have witnessed him trying to harm dogs and other animals, and that he loved doing that, that he tried to pick fights. He made a lot of threats on social media. His account got reported and was temporarily banned, but no actions were taken. And I have a gripe with this that I will later expand upon, but like his actions were in keeping with someone of a serial killer or a psychopath, absolutely. And the fact that it wasn't intervened at any point is an issue. He then turned 18. He asked his sister to buy him a rifle. She refused. He turned 18, and since he didn't have any particular history, and we'll talk on that later, since he didn't have any particular criminal history, there was not any particular restrictions on him buying a gun and the amount of rounds that he was able to buy with that. He also, on his social media accounts, he declared that he was going to shoot his grandmother and then go shoot up a school. And he did exactly that. And for all the monitoring that we have on these social media accounts, like the fact that his account was banned for such violent threats, I think it was threats of raping a girl, threats of shooting up that girl's school, and no one, like, he had pictures of himself posing with his weapons and pictures of his weapons, and that was reported to the account authorities, and nothing flagged the FBI's attention. And they have that control, they have that authority, but he was allowed back on the platform, and I guess back into that same group chat that was basically encouraging his behavior. It definitely wasn't stopping it or wasn't encouraging him against it or encouraging him to go seek help or mental help. It just seems there was, I think the FBI had a role to play in this, whether it was their lack of action or encouragement of action. But not that I'm a fan of the FBI having that monitoring authority or capability, but the fact that they do and they still didn't do anything about it, that's suspicious to me. Secondly, so the events of what happened was that he then, after shooting his grandmother, I'm not sure if it was in the head, that's what he said in his text, shot his grandmother called the police. So she called the police before he got to the school. So there should have already been police. I mean, the police response has been slow as far as I've been hearing across most cities and counties and nations. But the fact that she had already called the police, had already called an ambulance to go seek help and care, and the school, her house was not too far from the school, so there should have theoretically already been police in the area, for sure. And again, within near a school district and school county, that should have put somebody on alert. I don't understand. I don't know how frequent Uvalde gets shooters within their area, but that should have been an alert for the police. And we can talk about that when we talk about the corrective factors or things that would help alleviate or improve the outcomes of what happened. So he then drives his truck and crashes his truck in a ditch right outside the school. There were two responders that walked up to the vehicle. I'm not sure. I was told they were I wasn't told, but I think they were security men that walked up to the vehicle. I don't know what they saw. I don't know what they did. But after going to the vehicle, the two of them ran away, and I don't know what they did. I don't know if they alerted the school while they were running away, if they had those radios or anything, if they called the police after running away. But running away is the theme of this whole incident, the cowardice, absolute cowardice of the entire police force here. And I respect the police and what they do, but this was not, they failed. They failed in this instance. So they ran away. I don't know if they called the police or called for help. They certainly didn't try to prevent him. I don't know if they had a weapon on them themselves as security guards. Because if they did, it would have been 2 against 1. Not the best odds, but certainly they could have limited that attack from there before he got gotten anywhere near the school. Next thing happened is he opened the door to the school and walked right in. I guess there are multiple points of entry, and we see that. I'll talk on all those things later, but we see that he walked straight into the school, started going. I think he went to a specific classroom and began shooting. And what was so heart-wrenching was a kid going out into the hallway, seeing the shooter from the back, hearing the gunshots fired, and running back to his room. Like, no kid should have to go through that or witness that, but that was some of the things on the offense. Next, we see, I don't know how many geared up, armored, headgear, more experienced men coming into the school, going down the hallway, and then running back, and then just staying there, I guess, for the next 70 or so minutes until they finally decided to breach the door and take the shooter out and down. And over an hour of time. And so in medical care, there's something that's called the golden hour, where as long as someone who has been in critical care from a gunshot wound or whatever, within the hour that they get to their next point of higher care. So I'm certain that for a lot of kids, they were just bleeding out and dying if they had received that care beforehand. We would have had a lot more survivors for sure. But that golden hour had definitely passed for a lot of those kids, and they did not receive the care that they needed, and they died. So there was a lot wrong. Everything, especially with the situation, was done incorrectly. But the first thing that I will say about the tactics of the police officers, or lack thereof, is the general rule when you're doing an attack is, I think military attack is 3-1. That is, if you are the friendly and you're going up against enemy, 3-1 is at the minimum ratio that you want to have to be successful in an attack, right? So there was definitely more than 3 people with armored gear, with guns and weapons, with helmets, and you're telling me that all those grown men with actual training and actual experience couldn't have formed an attack mission to go up against the threat. They had to wait. And that's going to be an issue later. The second thing is, regardless of how many people there were, which they were more than enough, we understand that the police officers, for those who swear the oath, that might come with death. And that is a risk that they're willing to take when you take that oath. We understand that. So yes, the police officers, they may have been injured going up against this man or this little boy, the shooter. They may have been killed. They may have died, and it would have been sad. They would have been probably deemed as heroes, though, for putting themselves in harm's way, as they've taken an oath to do. It's not a scary. It's a scary thing. I get it. I mean, I'm not in that position to know. I get that it's a scary position. I'm not a police officer. I didn't sign up to do that. But the policemen there did. They signed up to do that, and they failed to do that. That was part of their duty, whether they liked it or not. But just basic tactics 101. I'm not even like a gamer or with a 1v1 or whatever this like combat games are. Like, I'm not even one of those people. But I understand that even if the however many men that were in that hallway, if they had started their fire towards the shooter, that the shooter would have to start defending himself against a more deadly attack, and not like to stop shooting at the defenseless young children and start shooting at the bigger threat, which would have been all the officers and their weapons and their training that were going up against them to take him down. So regardless of whether the police officers feared that a stray gun may or may not have gone past them and shot or something, which I doubt would have happened because of where they would have been aiming, which should have been at the chest or head, while all the kids are laying flat on the ground. Like, I don't think that would have been an issue. But them firing, like them firing at the shooter would have forced him to draw his fire away from the defenseless kids and towards the bigger threat. And they didn't do that. They didn't do that at all. They didn't even try to do that. It was also the fact that there was a police officer who had his eyes on the shooter before he went into a classroom, before he did anything, and he had to wait. He waited, and he was asking for approval to stop a threat from his supervisor or senior manager to get the go-ahead to take the shot, even though he had a clear shot, and that could have ended all the destruction effective immediately. And he didn't do that. So that was a failure there. They tried to negotiate with the shooter. And like, you don't negotiate with an active shooter. You stop the threat. You stop him from shooting. He's already done the damage. He's already entered the school. He already has the weaponry. He already has ammunition. There's no negotiation. I think we know that. I think that was like the whole thing with Columbine high school, and on all the protocols that were failed there. You don't negotiate with terrorists. This guy was a terrorist. You don't negotiate with the shooter. You take him out. So they shouldn't have done that. Another issue, and one of the kids has spoken up about it, poor things, but the police officers, before they stopped the threat and stopped the kid from shooting, the police officers called out to the kids to cry out if they needed help before they detained the shooter. And a young girl cried out help, and that alerted the shooter to her position, and he shot her because she cried out help, because the police officers told, like, poor thing, she didn't know any better. Some of the other kids knew to stay quiet, but she cried out for help, and I mean, she cried out for help, and then he shot, and I think that's when the police came in. But like, we don't do that. You just, like, it doesn't make sense. And so there was like a lot of incompetency, a lot of illogical actions that were going on there that just did not add up. A lot of failures. And so essentially what we have in this situation is 20 or so grown men trained in tactics, souped up military gear, garb, at least had some protection that may or may not have been effective or working. They had the military training. Theoretically, this kid has never shot before, and so his aim and whatever would have been sporadic at best. But yet, like, as soon as those police officers entered the building, that kid should have been terrified for his life, not the other way around. You're telling me you had one little kid against these 20 grown men and all their weaponry and all their knowledge and all their experience and all their equipment. Those grown men were running and scared and cowardice. Like, they had the parents on the outside of the school willing to go in and fight without the guns or the weapons, anything that they could have done to take their kids out of the school. And that same level should have been expected and multiplied in police officers. That same level of care for the kids, for the community, that should be expected of the police officers, and that wasn't there that day. There was just cowardice and failure to respond. And so this brings me up to the point where, as this community is mourning their loss, mourning the failures of their own system, and they have only themselves to blame, and just the stupidity of Beta O'Rourke, like again, as I said at the beginning, regardless of whether you are for guns or against guns, the day after, 3 days after however soon it was that he wanted to make his political statement about gun laws was not the time. And as we know, it's not about the guns, it's not about the weapons. We can all agree that guns bring death more quickly. That's for sure. And if it was a knife, maybe the outcome would have been different. That a knife may or may not have done less damage. That he may have been apprehended sooner, potentially. But we also know there's 10 dead now in Canada for a man with a knife on a killing spree. So, regardless of the weaponry used, that's not the issue. It's the people, it's the person behind the weapon and his desire to do evil and to kill and to murder. And to make it about anything else at that time is just asinine, stupid, and tone deaf. And so just the fact that he had the gall to even make a statement like that so soon after the incident just pisses me off. But the point of the matter, though, as well, is it's not the weapon. We get it that guns are deadly, as they are intended to be. That's the case. We don't like it when they're used for evil intentions, but they also have a purpose and a good intention behind that in the hands of a good person. And of someone who's not a coward and willing to put their life on the line or willing to do the right thing when it's time to do the right thing. And again, as I've said in previous videos, like, the guns aren't for self-defense. It's not even about the public self-defense. It's about the people and the government. Because as the people, we are the last check in power against a tyrannical government and of a government doing something against the will of the people. That's what guns are for. And they have an added benefit of being for self-defense, or an added consequence of also being used for terrorist attacks and for violence and reckless, needless violence, such as in the case of Uvalde. And so, if you want to talk about mitigations that could have taken place beforehand, one, before anything happened, we have a failure in our medical community, especially when it comes to psychiatrics, when it comes to mental health, of not having the things in place to address the issues that we see. And this is something that I plan on writing about as far as with a policy for or changing, but there's no, there's an intermediate step before jail time or homelessness. And usually it's a mental health issue, and we've shut down so many mental health hospitals and mental asylums across the nation, when we actually, there is a need for them. Like, whatever, a lot of the original and old practices of mental health have been extremely questionable and very much not ethical or scientifically basis or scientifically sound. But that doesn't take away from there being an actual need for these places in our society, because a lot of the people who are in jail or a lot of the people who are homeless, is a lot of the time it's due to some sort of mental issue or mental health issue. And so a solution to that, one, would be adding that sort of care, whether it's a social worker, whether it's a clinical psychologist, whether it's some sort of therapist of some sort, having that be an addition to the police force or to 911 medical help or care, or having that be an intermediate step, a mandated intermediate step before someone actually goes over the edge to commit the horrible crimes that they have. So in the case of this shooter, for all the people that had noted and said something wrong, like, unfortunately, the way with our laws are and the way that their current practices are, is that the police officers can't commit someone or arrest someone for not committing a crime, but there is an intermediate state before a crime is committed, where there is a state of mind that breeds or allows these things to happen, and that needs to be addressed regardless. And so having that mental health care provider or helper there to kind of actually, like, because there is a sense of confidentiality with these people, is to just take these at-risk folks aside and give them some mental health and mental training that could potentially alleviate some of these things. So that is one thing that I think would be beneficial for our society. I think there are some places that do that, but this needs to be across the country, or at least in the very heavily crime inducing and homeless populations, is what I would say there. If there's a certain level of crime activity, if there's a certain level of homelessness, the police force needs to have a psychologist or a therapist or something, or someone along those lines on that force that people can call in the state of emergency, or in the state where something's off with this person and they need some help. Because the kid was bullied, he came from a very poor, broken, I don't want to say broken, I think it was a broken home. He had some issues that other people recognized, but there was no intervention, there was no step to be taken before he went off and did his evil bidding. Secondly, with however communications go or work, if you're going to send 2 police officers or 2 personnel off to check a disturbance on the community, on the campus, which is, I think, is what happened, to make sure that they have some radio call. Because what they could have done, if they had a radio or something, some emergency communication device, a phone, to call 911 to let people know that this is what's happening, and to call the schools that they need to go on high alert. I mean, honestly, if Uvalde is not known for its shootings, if it's not known for such violence activities, what should have happened, or what could happen if they incorporate these things into their policies, is to once that grandmother called the hospital, and based off her location and her proximity to the school and the fact that it was a gunshot wound, to have been like, they should have gone into high alert. The whole school, like the police officer should have gone into high alert. One, like, just, hey, if there's a gunshot wound, there's gun violence in this vicinity near the school, regardless, to go on high alert. And what that could also do is, in those cases, is that the police community, or whatever the operator is, they call the schools that are within that vicinity and tell them to go on high alert or lockdown. And that also could have prevented or slowed his easy access to the school. So along those lines, is just making sure, if it's not a checkpoint or a point of entry through which someone has to go through in order to be seen by the front desk or be seen by the front offices, all other doors should be locked.
I mean, honestly, when I think about it more, it's like, where else do we actually do this? Where we have something or someone that's inside, and we just let people in and out without questioning them, or without like an appointment or something. You know what I'm trying to say? So like a bank, what do? They lock up their precious goods. Not that I'm comparing kids to gold or something, because they're obviously way more precious than that. But it's like something where you don't allow anyone just access. So it might be something where the doors are locked, but only staff and faculty have codes to get in freely. If anyone else wants to come into the school, they have to make an appointment. That's to announce their case. Like, even in your own home, again, you have one singular point of entry. If someone wants to come in, they have to knock, and you have to, like, the person opening the door can verify who they are before, opening the door. They don't have to let anyone in. You know what I'm trying to say? So, like, this is there's so much more that we can do.
You know what I'm saying? During class period time, like, I don't know if that's something that, technologically speaking, that schools can do. Is like, if it's not essentially during class hours, schools are locked, schools are closed, and you might have to digitally unlock a door during class change periods, where you have to change classrooms or something like that. That is a protocol that could have a potential. But the fact that he went to a random door and just walked in all willy-nilly, like, we don't do that for pretty much anywhere else. There are points of entry that you have to go through if you want to enter in. The same should go for a school. As well as, just, again, if they knew that they were going on lockdown for all or if the police officers had called the schools to be like, hey, be on high alert. There is a potentiality of a gun shooter within your area. And that would have made the students or the teachers to lock their doors, close the windows, get away from the windows, and, initiate those active shooter protocols or whatever. I don't know if they would need to initiate it immediately, but at least lock the doors. That's like a minimum thing that could have been done. Obviously, if he shot the door handle or whatever, make it harder for him to do damage is all I would say there. So those are some of the basic things. I think they also, for the two security guard, I think I said this earlier, if they had a police, if the two policemen had guns on them as security officers, trained individual security officers for the school to protect the school and their children, having an armed officer on campus, I think would be absolutely beneficial as the first line defense against a crazy psychopath. So if those two police officers who had intercepted him, the shooter, right after he got out of his vehicle, they could have shot him right there, and that would have prevented the whole escalade of events. I'm just trying to think of anything else. So that's just several protocols that could and can be in place to prevent something like this in the future. Adding armed security guards to the school, the protocols for lockdown advice, if there are, like, again, like, I don't think that crime activity was rampant or active in that area, so that the fact that someone did get shot and call the police for that should have put people on high alert, should put people on high alert, and its vicinity to school should put people on high alert. As far as policing protocol goes, again, you had 4 people. Like, one of the protocol is you stop the shooter. If you know there's a shooter, you stop the shooter. You don't wait. You don't wait for permission. You don't need permission to stop a shooter from going on. You don't need to ask or wait for backup guys. I mean, I say this, I'm not a law enforcement. I'm sure Officer Brandon Tatum, has given his own advice or feel on this. But for me, outside looking in, it's just like all you needed was the amount of people who were there the first time, that team of like 5 men or so who showed up, that should have been enough for them to go in and stop the shooter. Some of them may have been severely injured. Some of them may have died, but it would have been a quicker response, and not have these people in dying out in the classrooms feeling like they were forgotten about. It would have allowed for the medical care to have gotten to a lot of these students a lot sooner to save a lot more lives. So, like, that's not a new protocol. They should have just done it. And post-event, a lot of these people need to be fired for failure in leadership and failure in decision-making, because there's no reason why it should have taken this long, or that these men supposedly were in this position where they had the upper hand and failed to use it. So to rechange the system, the people who are going, like, need to serve, need to want to serve. These are people, like, they're supposed to be the better of us, the people who have more moral integrity, who have more courage, who have a higher sense of justice, a higher sense of urgency, of wanting to stop threats and attacks. And if these people aren't in the positions, then, like, what are you doing? What are they doing there? You know? So, like, again, like, the whole system, what I won't say from this event is that you now need to take away guns from their citizens. I don't think that correlates. That doesn't correlate. All the other citizens seem to have been fine with maintaining their guns and not shooting up a school. So don't think that was the issue. I do think, though, that if we're going to talk about, again, the intervention, the pre-intervention of psychological help, and interference, like, that's got to go on a record. If we're going to keep these background checks in place, to have the psychological intervention, for that psychological intervention to go on someone's record, not because it's a bad thing, but to let people know, like, this is someone who has had struggles and difficulties with violence against others, against people, against animals, etc. And that might have been a deterrent if they were to do a background check of him as an 18-year-old adult. Like, even as a child, this state of mind, you've had an issue with it before, and there might need to be some caution before allowing this person to purchase a gun. Again, like, there's a lot of other things that can happen that are perfectly reasonable, that aren't encroaching on amendment rights of the people against the government. But what the heck do I know? I'm just an amateur. Just this whole situation is just heart-wrenching. It's heart-wrenching. But just let me know what you think in the comments. What would be your suggestions or improvements for this situation that ought to be implemented within this school, county, or even elsewhere. Make sure you like, comment, share, subscribe, and I will catch you in the next video. Thanks for watching.